Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. A real pleasure tonight for me to introduce you to really just an unbelievably impressive young lady. I met her, I don't know, maybe about 8 years ago. She was a model at a Mississauga Fashion Week event, and number one, she wowed everyone with her stage presence and her ability to just capture the crowd. And then I started chatting with her and found out she was doing a PhD. And she's now Dr. Nafeesa Jalal, and you run your own consulting company, and the consulting company specializes in diversity and inclusion issues. And so I'm welcoming you to the show and really want to hear what your company and the topic of diversity and inclusion is all about. Tell me about it, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brian. This is wonderful. And I love that at least once a year we get to meet on your show. Last year, I think, was for International Women's Day. Exactly.
Yep.
So somehow we
Which is coming up very soon as well.
Which is coming up next
month.
And
you know, I think that we're in Black History Month right now.
Yes,
and you know, I think it's been really interesting, you know, some of the events in Ottawa over the course of the last little while, where some people think that there's a fair amount of non-inclusion and actually some very racist things that have been sort of exhibited. So I think it's completely appropriate that we have you here tonight to talk about diversity and inclusion. So how did you get into diversity and inclusion? Because your PhD was in public health, I think, and you did a bunch of work in South Africa with maternal breastfeeding and stuff like this. So tell me about the evolution, please.
Great memory, maternal health, absolutely, Brian. So I get asked this question a lot because there's my public health background with the PhD and the education before that, and then all of my work experience. And for me, Brian, I think I had never planned on going into DEI the way that I did, and it sort of ended up happening that way.
And DEI is?
Diversity, equity, inclusion. And we can definitely talk about what that means in an organizational context especially. But I think for me, what happened was I was working with hospitals, I was working with healthcare organizations in Canada and abroad, as you know, in Bangladesh and in South Africa. And I started to realize the amount of racism that was within our healthcare sector.
In our healthcare system?
In our healthcare sector. And,
really?
and I understand that it's in all sectors. And so it really, healthcare is not exclusive or inclusive of that. But I started to see in my everyday work how we treat patients, the kind of culture that we have in our healthcare organizations, big and small, and the amount of racism, the amount of prejudice, the amount of discrimination, the amount of microaggressions we have in that space. And I started to transition slowly into having a bigger interest in what that looks like. And today, of course, years later, I don't just work with healthcare organizations. As you know, I work with organizations in all sectors because these issues are not just exclusive to any one sector.
When you say you're working with them, what do? You do assessments or counsel them or give them ideas on how to change? What?
Great question. So with diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'll just get to what that means in a second, my firm, Jalal Global Consulting, focuses on a few areas of work. The biggest thing I would say that clients come to for are our workshops, so the education component. So if you are an organization and you contact me, we customize a workshop just for you. And so it's not one workshop that we deliver to every organization under the sun because we recognize that every organization's culture and needs are so different. So we come and meet you where you're at to say, this is what we're doing, this is what our issues are, this is what our challenges are, these are what our opportunities are, and we prepare a workshop specifically for you, whether it be your staff or your board or other stakeholders or whatever your line of work is. So the workshops are very, very popular. The other thing that our firm offers is strategic plans, so diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plans, because a workshop is a one-time thing, or a two-time thing, or three-time, depending on how many you want, but you need to have a plan. Just like you have a strategic plan for your organization in terms of where are we going, what do we want to accomplish. With DEI, it's important to look at things long-term.
Right.
So we do interviews with your people to recognize what the issues are on the internal side because we're external, so we don't always understand what's happening on the inside. And then we sit down and we add in research and best practices and what are other organizations doing, and we put it all together for you in a very detailed step-by-step plan. And I think this has just been phenomenal for clients, because many people will say, we want to be more inclusive, we want to be more equitable, we value these concepts, but we're not sure what that means. We're not sure what it means in a tangible, every day by day, step by step, process by process way. So our strategic plans do that for you. They'll say, well, Brian, this is year one. This is what you do in the first 3 months. These are things we prioritize. This is how we measure. The other product that I think our firm is really well known for are our policy reviews. Every organization has many, many documents. Some of them are internal, many are external facing as well. We look at your documents through a DEI lens, a diversity, equity, inclusion lens, and we make sure that your documents are fit for purpose.
Okay.
So we make sure that we vet the language, and language, I always say, is a moving target, because what was acceptable to say 10 years ago or even 5 years ago
May not be acceptable today.
may not be acceptable today.
Yep.
And what is acceptable today may not be acceptable tomorrow. So it's important to be constantly on the forefront of that learning and at that change to say, how are we phrasing things? Are we offending anyone? Are we leaving anyone out? Are we excluding anyone? Or do we have the most inclusive, most appropriate language for all of our stakeholders?
But one of the things that I think you explained to me a year ago when we were
Yeah.
chatting about this was that you're not doing this just as a nice to do,
No.
or that it's the right thing, because it is the right thing. But you're doing it, or at least you're telling companies to do it, because it actually is smart business. It's good. It's good for the bottom line to include people that either look like their customers and know what their customers want, and or to get diverse ideas about how to solve different business problems. Is that not the case?
That is definitely the case, and I'm so glad that you remember that from last year. I appreciate that. So when we talk about this acronym of DEI, just for our listeners, because it's thrown out so widely right now, diversity refers to the differences that all of us carry. And so whether that be academically, research shows us that when we talk about diversity, if I were to ask you, Brian, what do you think about when I say the word diversity? North American research shows that most people right away say race. So for most people, diversity almost equates race, in that it's the first and only difference they see in people. However, what's really, really important to recognize, and I think we talked about this before as well, is that diversity is not just race. Diversity is all of our differences. So if you're an organization and you're on the leadership team, you have to recognize that you're not just trying to learn about what people's racial backgrounds are. What are their economic backgrounds? What are their educational backgrounds? What about disabilities and abilities? What about gender? What about sexual orientation? What about all the different pieces that make up people?
Well, just a simple thing is different functional area. It's interesting. There's been social capital studies about linking social capital that you're probably aware of, that show that people in different functional areas that actually have the more links to other functional areas get more promotions, do better, get better bonuses, climb the ladder of success. People that only know engineers or only know accountants or only know actuaries end up being stuck in their own functional area and not being able to grow. So, diversity is everything, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think some of your doctoral research was on social capital as well, if I remember correctly. Yeah, my memory is not too bad either, and I remember that from our previous conversations. And I also see this in the research work that I do with Trillium with our breast cancer patients. People who have a strong support system, people who have networks that they can connect to, just have a different level of health in our community. So I think diversity, like you say, is everything, is perfectly said, because it is everything. Recognizing people's differences means recognizing their different needs, means recognizing their different capabilities, and how can we support better and in which ways. So,
but inclusion is a whole other step, is it
Exactly.
not? And I love that line that gets often quoted about diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice.
Absolutely.
So tell me about how you take a diverse workforce and actually become an inclusive
100%.
one.
So before I do that, I will go ahead and define the E part of it.
No, I want to come back to the E
You want to come back to the E? Okay, but let's make sure we come back to the E, because it's super important.
Because I think it should be the last one, not this middle one.
Yeah, and as long as we've got all three of them, I think different organizations, some people will do EDI, some people will do DEI, but inclusion, Brian, is so fundamental. It's so important, because diversity alone does not give us the work culture that we need. Inclusion means we have a seat at the table. To put it as simply as we can. Inclusion means you feel welcomed, you feel respected, You feel like you have a voice. And that's what you need to do. A lot of organizations will say, well, we value diversity, so we have an organization filled with different people.
But they don't invite them to the table.
They don't invite them to the table.
Or the decision making.
Exactly. And that's what I'll tell them. I'll tell them diversity alone does not get you the results that you need. You just spoke about how companies do better when they invest in this work. Absolutely. Research shows us again and again that companies who understand DEI or EDI or however way you want to frame that acronym, who really understand the meaning of these things and who actually do the work behind it, have transformational organizations. Yeah. So inclusion, like we said, is having a seat at the table. You can't just have people at your organization who look different and think different and are different, and then you pick and choose when they can say something and when they can't. You've got to be able to bring them to the table.
The slogan I love about that you probably heard is diversity is getting invited to the dance. Yes. Inclusion is being asked to dance.
Absolutely, and I always have that in my workshops, and it really gets people thinking, because I think all of us have been in that circumstance. We've all been in a space where we've been invited for the sake of being invited, but we didn't really feel like we belonged.
Yeah.
We didn't really feel like we could enjoy ourselves or even be ourselves. Authentically being ourselves is so important, not just at a party, but especially at organizations where we spend so much of our time.
But it also is interesting, and you referred to my research on social capital, it is interesting that if things aren't changing in the marketplace, being the same is actually really good from an implementation standpoint. And so, you know, when you think about the car industry in the 50s and 60s, when everyone looked like me and went to the same country clubs in Detroit and things like that, that was okay, because from an implementation standpoint, when you didn't have to adapt and you didn't have to change, that was okay. But when all of a sudden small quality cars were coming in from Japan or whatnot, and you had to adapt and you had to think about new things, it's been proven over and over again that a diverse workplace actually could adapt, because they came up with more ideas. They came up and they challenged the status quo. And so if all you're trying to do is implement the status quo, you know, you frankly don't need diversity. But when you're going to be confronted with changes in the marketplace, new ideas, new competitors, etc., it's really helpful to have a diverse workforce. And if you're going to, you know, exploit the ideas that come from that diverse workforce, you got to include them. You got to have them at the table.
That's it. That's it. And there's this example that I oftentimes use in my workshops about an airplane. Let's say all of us are on this airplane. It's about to crash. If all of us look the same and think the same and have the same background, we're probably going to come up with one idea altogether, the same idea on how to save ourselves. But if every one of us are diverse and inclusive, and we come from an inclusive atmosphere where we are included, where our voices matter, perhaps I'm going to have an idea on how we're going to save ourselves. And you're going to have a different idea, and the third person on the plane with us is going to have a different idea. So then we have a dozen different ideas on how can we save ourselves from this plane that's going to crash.
But I think the key is then the E, because you go from diversity to inclusion and getting a seat at the table to equality, having an equal vote at the table. And that is, I think, the big challenge. But we're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with you to talk about the E and equality. Stay with us. Nafeesa Jalal of Nafeesa Jalal Consulting. We're going to take a break. Come back in just a minute.
अगर खुशियां गिनने का मीटर होता तो साफ दिख जाता सऊदी अरब वाले असगर भाई की इतनी, दुबई में सलमान और शाहिदा बाजी की इतनी, बर्तानिया से राशिद चचा और अमेरिका वाले आसिम साहब की ना सिर्फ इतनी खुशियां बढ़ चुकी हैं, बल्कि बढ़ती ही जा रही हैं। इन सब के साथ साथ दीगर पाकिस्तानी भी ढेरों खुशियां समेट रहे हैं सोनी धरती रेमिटेंस प्रोग्राम के शानदार रिवॉर्ड पॉइंट्स के साथ। तो बैंक्स और एक्सचेंज कंपनी से रकम भेजते रहिए और हासिल करते रहे रिवॉर्ड पॉइंट्स के बदले फ्री सर्विसेज, इंटरनेशनल एयर टिकट्स, टैक्स और ड्यूटी पेमेंट्स, शिनाख्ती दस्तावेजात की रिन्यूअल, इंश्योरेंस पेमेंट्स, यूटिलिटी स्टोर से खरीदारी और बहुत सारी सहूलियात। आज ही सोनी धरती ऐप डाउनलोड कीजिए और रजिस्टर हो जाइए, क्योंकि आपके दम से ही है पाकिस्तान की तरक्की और खुशहाली। सोनी धरती रेमिटेंस प्रोग्राम, हमेशा अपनों के करीब। हुकूमत पाकिस्तान, स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान और मालियाती इदारों की जानिब से एक अहम कदम।
रोशन, तू फिर पाकिस्तान आ गया?
क्या करूं भाईजान, इधर के काम ही नहीं खत्म होते।
छोटा मुंह बड़ी बात करने लगा हूँ।
खैर ये तो आप तकल्लुफ ही कर रहे हैं।
बड़ी अहम बात है, गौर से सुन। दुबई वापस जाते ही ऑनलाइन रोशन डिजिटल अकाउंट खुलवाओ।
ये जो बैंक ऑफ पंजाब ने शुरू किया हुआ है।
हाँ, स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान की हदायत पर ओवरसीज पाकिस्तानियों के लिए सहूलत है। इधर देख, प्रदेश से घर के बिल अदा करने हो, पैसे भिजवाने हो, नया पाकिस्तान सर्टिफिकेट या स्टॉक मार्केट में सरमायाकारी करनी हो, गाड़ी निकलवानी हो, अपने घर के लिए कर्ज चाहिए हो, सब हो सकता है। इसके अलावा 24 घंटे ऑनलाइन बैंकिंग की सहूलत भी।
बस बस बस, मेरे सारे मसले हल हो गए। बस अब शादी रह गई।
तो आप अभी www.bop.com.pk विजिट करें और अपना रोशन डिजिटल अकाउंट बिल्कुल मुफ्त खुलवाएं। बैंक ऑफ पंजाब, रखे हर फर्द का ख्याल।
Discover the ultimate South Asian fashion at Dage. The most desirable wardrobe styling from famous Pakistani designers. One of the largest clothing stores in Toronto. Plan a visit today or shop online at dagefashions.com.
Come on in.
This is your new home, Mira.
परदेस चली एक नन्ही परी सहमी सी
Mira.
थोड़ी डरी खुशबुओं में घुला मिला कोई अपना नसीब से गिरूं सजदे अपने वहीद के। Would you like to try some?
Paneer biryani favorite.
Are you a real estate investor or corporate real estate agent? Did you know smart real estate investors and agents have been using a virtual real estate investment financial strategy to reduce and eliminate their personal, corporate, and estate taxes? Call and let me show you how.
Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. It's a real pleasure of mine tonight to be talking with Nafeesa Jalal of Nafeesa Jalal Consulting. She specializes in diversity, equity, and inclusion. She corrected me. It's not equality, it's equity, though I think equity and equality are about the same thing, but we'll talk about whether there's any difference in. And I got to tell you, this person, I think, practices what you preach. And you and I met, and let's go back there just for an example,
Yeah.
I think, at the Mississauga Fashion Week. And the Mississauga Fashion Week, which has been in abeyance during COVID, which is too bad, I think was an example of exactly what you're consulting about. So the people that were the key organizers behind that were Muslim. And you know, came into Mississauga and got the Mississauga Arts Council, which at the time was frankly not terribly non-white. It was pretty white. Involved in co-sponsoring and co-organizing and putting on the events. And then the fashion shows themselves were incredible, because what they tried to do is they tried to include all different people that are in Mississauga and the fashions for them. And so, you know, there were people in bikinis and there were people in niqabs. And it was really interesting, and you know, beautiful Pakistani outfits, beautiful African outfits, beautiful Latin American Spanish outfits, beautiful North American outfits, all designed by people in Mississauga from different cultures.
That's right.
And it was diverse, and it was inclusive, and frankly, I think it was equal. Maybe not equity, but equal.
It was a fabulous event, Brian, and I absolutely miss all the events that we used to do before COVID, absolutely. And Mississauga is a very diverse, culturally, ethnically diverse city, as we know. And it's grown to be a very, very good example of how diversity comes together and brings progress and brings innovation and brings change and brings products and services and a culture that all of us can admire, because like you say, the fashion shows were brilliant and they represented.
But I got to tell you, you know, so 57% of Mississauga residents have lived in Canada for less than 10 years. So the vast majority, you know, of people have recently arrived as immigrants into to Canada, let alone into Mississauga. So I think that's fascinating. Yet on council, there's only one person that's not white. Only one of 11 people on council, 11 wards plus the mayor, so 12 council members. And there's probably 5 or 6 council seats that are going to open up this year. And I hope that after this year's election, council looks a little bit more like the population of Mississauga. We'll see what happens. Someone like you should think about running for council.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. Thank you. And you've just hit it on the head with the equity piece that I'll talk about in just one second, but also the representation. We have to, as organizations, reflect the communities that we serve. And in the same token, we in leadership have to look like the people that we serve. So oftentimes organizations will say, oh, we value diversity, we have a very diverse staff base, but the diversity will look different from every stage of the organization. So at the entry level, you might have diversity. You might have a lot of different people from different backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, different racial backgrounds. The higher up you go in the organization, it's a lot less. Yeah. The higher up you go, whether it be the senior leadership team or it be the board, where is that representation?
But that's why I thought the E was equality, because I thought, you know, the whole idea was not just diversity inclusion at the bottom of a pyramid in a company, but the whole way up. Absolutely. And so you're saying it's equity. So what's the difference between my version of E being equality and your version of E being equity?
Thank you so much for asking this. This is such an important question, and I think it's a really interesting one when we talk about it. So equity, Brian, I use it synonymously oftentimes with the word fairness. Equality is giving everyone the same. Equity is giving people what they need. And in the past, the goal for organizations so often was equality. It was giving everybody the same, and then they felt like their job was done. In the past few decades now, we have headed towards a place where equity has room. So let me give you a very simple example that showcases the difference between equality and equity. Let's say this is an evening program, and I say, well, Brian, I'm going to order us some pizza, and all of us that are in the studio right now are going to have pizza, and I decide to be equal about it. What that means is, let's say if there are 6 of us here right now, I'm going to cut the pizza in 6 pieces, everyone gets 1 slice, and I've been equal. Equity is giving people, is giving people what they need. If I know that, for example, you haven't eaten in 3 days and you're very hungry.
You're going to give me more?
Hold on. And if I see that, you know, Mark working with us has just had dinner before he's come here and he's not hungry at all, then what equity means is that I might give him half a slice, something small, because he's just had a meal. And I know that Brian hasn't eaten in 3 days, so I'm going to give him 2 or 3 slices so that you are full. So equity does what equality aims to, which is brings everyone up to the same level. So after you've had your 3 slices and say Mark's had his half a slice, you're both going to be at the same level of not hungry. But if I were to do the equality part where I gave you a slice and I gave him a slice, he might say, well, you know what, I feel sick and stuffed because I've just had a meal. And you might have your slice and say, you know what, Nafeesa, I'm still hungry because I've only had 1 slice. So what we do is we focus on equity, realizing, remember that diversity piece, that every one of us are different. Every one of our journeys are different.
Okay, so let me ask you a couple of questions about that. So Joe Biden, the President of the United States, has recently announced that he's going to, before the end of the month, nominate the first black female to the Supreme Court of the United States. Some Republican leaders are aghast, saying that that's inappropriate because you're cutting out 94% of the American population from being potential Supreme Court justices. Other people say, well, there's never been a black female on the Supreme Court, and so therefore it's about time. And there are some qualified black females, in fact, a lot of qualified black females that are justices and deserve that. Is that equality? Is that equity? Is that inclusion? Or is that affirmative action? Or is that quotas?
So that can be a number of things based on how you look at it. Definitely, like you just said, if we haven't had a person of this background in that position before, and we have highly qualified people who can lead that role, then it's about representation. It's about making sure that you have that representation on there. How many legislations have we had? How many political governments have we had? How many organizational boards have we had where certain people have always been missing? Time after time after time. And so then that question becomes, why do we not have anyone from that background? Is it because they're not qualified? Is it because we have other biases that we work with internally for which we've never given them a chance? So that we can look at in several different ways. And remember, if equity means fairness, equity means giving people the access to opportunities. So we're not saying here that the woman that needs to be in that role is not going to be qualified and that she's only going to get that role because she's Black. No, we're saying that certain people from certain backgrounds have never held that role because of all sorts of issues that we have in society, because of systemic racism, because of other disadvantages that many communities have. And so how do we play fair? How do we give people access?
So do you think something like saying that you're going to have a Black female for the first time on the Supreme Court is the right thing for a president to do?
I think it's very important. I think there are certain people in our communities, many groups that are represented widely in the U.S., where someone from their group has never made it to a certain role. And so I think it's very important that we give people an opportunity. We're not saying we're picking someone blindly because of the color of their skin. Absolutely not.
They've got to be qualified to start with as well.
Exactly. We're
it's
not
interesting
doing a tick
because
box.
there were a whole bunch of people that opposed the idea, I think particularly for partisan reasons, until it was pointed out that Ronald Reagan, president, Republican conservative president that a lot of Republican conservatives think very highly of, stated during his election campaign that he was going to appoint the first female to the Supreme Court, and he did. And so you know, they quieted down after that. That was kind of interesting. I saw an interesting video from this convoy protest in southern Alberta. I'm not sure if you saw it. It was a whole group of truckers of South Asian descent, and they were saying that they weren't represented by the people protesting, but they were caught up in this blockade. And they said, you know, you look at the people that are protesting, not one person of South Asian descent is in that group. They're all white. They said, we're all fully vaccinated, double vaccinated, and they all said that they were boosted as well. They were taking produce and goods down to the United States, and off of them, almost all of them had, they said, pickup dates to pick something up and bring it back that we were using. And they said that they you know, weren't able to go get food, they weren't able to go get gas because they couldn't get their trucks out of the blockade. And they said, this is a small minority of white, they said, we don't even know these truckers, that are imposing their beliefs on us, completely uninclusive. What do you think of that?
So I don't know if I've watched the video you have, but I've seen many articles in the media, obviously in the past few days about this. I think what they're saying is they're stating their point of view. What's happening in Ottawa right now, without going very deep into politics, is representative of a small group of people. Any sector is not going to, any representative rather, let's phrase it that way, any event that takes place like this is never going to represent all the people who belong to that sector. So in the trucking, as we saw with the South Asian truckers saying, these people that are here in Ottawa don't represent us. They don't represent our values and our beliefs, and these...
No, they weren't even talking to the people in Ottawa. They were talking to the people that were actually blocking the border crossing in southern Alberta.
No, I think, Brian, it's very important to recognize that right now what's happening in the country with this debate it includes a small group of people. And I'm not saying that their voice is not important, because we live in a country where we want to make sure everyone has a platform to be able to raise their voice. But when the South Asian truckers are saying that they don't represent us, that's what it is. And so when you think about representing a profession or a group, it's very important that you be mindful of that and that the media cover it like that.
Do you think this is opposition to diversity and inclusion? Is it people that, have been confronted with Canada changing and don't like it?
I think in many ways, yes. I think when we look at a lot of the people who are on the front lines of some of these fights, we are seeing sentiments in them that don't value, we're hearing words from them that don't value the diversity that Canada so proudly
How do we
represents.
change their attitudes?
This is so important, and I think education is so primary. We are a multicultural country, and most of us on most days value this. And it's very important for us that all of us value this. So one thing that I think is very important is education. Making sure that every one of us push ourselves to be educated about different people, about different groups. All of us make up Canada. All of us bring something unique to the nation. And when we talk about biases and we talk about racism and discrimination and prejudice, and we put that on groups, oftentimes we put it on groups that we know nothing about, and we choose not to know. So I think the education part of it is very important. The cultural competency part of it is very important. To be open-minded is very important. To be respectful is very important. To understand that this country has no space to tolerate people who are intolerant. To understand that what happened, I mean, we recently commemorated the 5th anniversary of the Quebec mosque shooting. And we all remember it quite clearly. I know I definitely do because I belong to that community. And 5 people died, 6 people were badly injured in a setting like a mosque, in a place of worship where we're supposed to be safe, where we're supposed to be able to be at peace and away from the world for a moment. And so acts like this are not representative, I think, of the bigger Canadian culture, if you will. The messaging that we put forward to say that we are a welcoming nation, we are an inclusive nation. Every single person in this country needs to be respected and valued regardless of their racial background.
I agree with you completely. I think education is important. But you know what I think it is? You're comment about inclusivity.
Yeah.
And coming back to academic studies, if people have played soccer with someone of a different race or religion, if they've been in a band, if they've been in a choir, if they've gone to school with people of a different race and different religion, they become a lot more accepting.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. So inclusivity is, I think, the key. And so I think the answer is, invite someone over for dinner. Break bread together. We've been doing that for a couple millenniums, and that's the solution, is get to know people like they really are. And I think the Mississauga Fashion Week did a great job of that. I think that you do that extremely well in your consulting, so thank you. And I do think all of you out there can make a difference in this regard. And I've been very honored that I've been invited into different mosques to break the fast, have an iftar dinner. I've gone to Jewish synagogues. I've gone to all different churches and cathedrals within the Christian community. And people should do that.
Yes.
Like the best music you'll hear in Mississauga is at a gospel black church up by the Meadowvale GO train station. And people listen to these monks from Europe. You go and you hear a really good Aman chanting prayers. It's beautiful. And so I think we can enjoy and celebrate and share each other's cultures, and we need to do that more often.
I love
Nafeesa,
that.
thank you so much for joining us tonight and bringing us this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Brian. You've just encapsulated beautifully to say this is the opportunity here in Canada. All of us being able to get to know each other, all of us being able to build this nation together to be what it continues to be and to be what it needs to be, which is having a space, all of us at the table, and having a voice at that table as well. So thank you for everything that you do and for everything that I think all of our colleagues bring to the table in diversity, equity, inclusion, and just multiculturalism and the beauty that this nation brings.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. Go out there and break bread with your neighbors, even if, and particularly if, they look a little bit different and worship a little different than you. Good night, everybody.